We are taking a closer look at our annual Gender Diversity Report, Narrowing the Gender Divide. In this webinar by Hayes Open Studio, an exclusive Q&A with Yvonne Smyth, Group Head of Diversity at Hayes. Women powering the world of work. Hello everybody, welcome to the Hayes Open Studio, your most important update on the world of work. In this webinar we have a first look on our annual Gender Diversity Report. We promise that by the end of this 25-minute webinar, you will know how your organization can help narrow the gender gap. My name is Wouter van Ewijk, and I'm very honored to have a special guest live from London, Yvonne Smyth, and she's our Group Head of Diversity. Live from London. Hello, Yvonne.
Good morning, Wouter. Good morning, everybody. I'm delighted to be here.
Thank you so much. So it's not very far away, Amsterdam, London, but it's easier to do the digital connection. Yvonne, before we start off, first of all, I'm very curious. What makes you so passionate about diversity in the broader sense?
Well, I am certainly passionate about diversity and inclusion. We'll come on to that. I guess going through life and spending over 20 years in recruitment with Hayes, my role has evolved, and I have had increasing numbers of conversations with both clients and with candidates, so the talent as we might call it, about actually how their professional experience mirrors and really matches the requirements of their personal life experience. And really that sits at the essence of diversity and inclusion. So for me, diversity is all about difference. That's simply what it is, it's difference. And it's really enabling that dividend, if you like, to come through and that value to come through. It makes life and experiences and workplaces more interesting, more vibrant, more innovative. So that's why I love it so much.
Sure. Good. Obviously, we're both with Hayes. It's an annual report. Can you give us a brief history of why Hayes has also become so passionately involved with the topic diversity and inclusion?
Absolutely. Well, so really, why Hayes? I mean, as you say, this is the third report that we've done. And I guess the report is just one element of a much wider conversation we're having around diversity and inclusion with our clients and indeed with the candidates that we work with. As far as D&I is concerned and diversity is concerned, the conversation is moving on and we're really keen to be part of that conversation. So it is evolving and it's moving really from being, what is perceived as being the right thing to do to really becoming, the smart thing to do. So we love being at the centre of that. The gender piece is just one of a number of underrepresented groups that we address and really consult with our clients on, as well as delivering recruitment solutions. Why do we look at gender in particular? Well, frankly, most of our clients are. Because when we look at women in the workplace in particular, in terms of underrepresentation, we actually see a huge opportunity to increase participation and the success of women as they move through their careers. Our clients see the same thing. There's a lot of women, 50% of the global population in theory, but also there is lots of visible difference there in the main. And so actually there is something that clients can get at, identify and hopefully take some action on. So that's really why we focus on the report. And because we are a global business, it's very useful for us and we're really quite uniquely placed to pull in various touch points from around the globe, frankly. Different countries are at different stages in their experience and we hope to be able to share some of that insight to both empower organisations and also inform and empower individuals.
Yeah, because we should also emphasize that it's broader than gender diversity, obviously, and also it varies a lot per country. obviously. There's nothing more diverse than a national culture difference, and the difference between countries. So that also comes down to the various topics we have in the report itself. So the themes we cover are career ambition, equal opportunity, flexible working, and diversity and inclusion. Like I said, obviously, worldwide, there's a difference between countries. Luckily, there is. But taken just to start with a couple of examples, taking the Western European countries, what can you say in regards to career ambitions between men and women in Western European countries?
Okay, so as you say, diversity is a much wider topic than just this gender, and there are certainly in-country differences. But if we generally look at Europe, and we call that first world, and I would also introduce perhaps Australia and New Zealand to that, and the USA, there are certainly some common themes that we're seeing. There are, if we just look at the Dutch results, there'll be some touch points and some reference points that we can, share with the audience. But generally speaking, if we look at career ambition, so just to backtrack a moment, the reason we identified these 4 different pillars to really survey on and try and get perception on was because we were seeing these as very common and shared themes coming through some of our engagement with both clients and with candidates. So let's look at career ambition first of all. Generally speaking, men and women are equally ambitious. The difference is, and so men and women will aspire to roles that give them recognition and the opportunity to lead if that is what they want. So there is an aspiration to reach the top quartile of their organizations. The difference that we start to see is actually the lived experience of men and women does differ fairly significantly. And this is really one of the purposes of the report. It's to shine a light where we have real differences of perceptions between men and women, and to see how we can bring those closer together. So the difference we see on career ambition is that men are much more proactive in driving their careers forward. So if we just take the very essence of that, which is promotion, the audience that we surveyed, 29%, so 30% of the men who were surveyed and who responded said that they had applied for a promotion in the last 12 months. Only 14% of women had applied for a promotion. Now, we deliberately posed the question in terms of the respondent proactively applying as opposed to being tapped on the shoulder. So that's interesting in terms of who's pushing themselves forward and being proactive in their career. There are some link points to that. Another data point that we had around ambition was that actually both about 30% of men and women felt that they were not in a position to actually move on to their next role. So despite that, and despite that being a common feeling and percentage, actually more men went ahead and pushed themselves forward and applied for their promotion. So that's quite an interesting statistic. A point that's, Walter, 1 minute. A point that's linked to that also is the point about career plans. So in terms of career plans, they're very important clearly to keep an individual on track. And 66% of men had a career plan in place, and only 39% of women had a career plan in place.
Yeah. So obviously it's statistics. The survey questions follow each other, and they make a causal link to each other. But I would say that there's also a big difference. That's the consideration of women. That's the difference between men and women themselves. The men going for their adventure, and the women might consider facts in life, important aspects of life more. What do you think about that?
Yeah, well, I've got a phrase for that, and you know, there are various phrases that are used, I suppose, when we look at the quite inherent differences between men and women. And there is stereotyping here, I admit, but stereotypes exist for a reason. So, there is data that shows us that if a man feels that they can deliver 4 out of 10 competencies on a particular project or job description, they'll go for it. And frankly, they'll fake it till they make it. That's my phrase. Whereas, a woman will really be very keen to fulfill all 10 criteria. And so that really holds them back. And that, I think, is one of the reasons why we don't see the ambition that sits there in a woman sometimes pushing through to actually the lived experience of work.
Yeah. Dealing with the diversity report in the Netherlands, I was fortunate enough to, besides you, interview 3 more leading ladies who are from the industry, from electronics, from IT, and also insurance, finance. And they say that, there's a question in the survey that says, what level do you want to reach success, to be successful? And it varies. For the men, they say they want to reach the top management, and the women, they want to reach the middle management. But it doesn't say anything about the considerations of why they want it. It's just a black and white statement: middle compared to top. And the funny thing is that all three of the leading ladies that I interviewed, they said, yeah, but what we see amongst women is that they want to be a specialist more within their function, within their role. So the 9 or 10 out of 10 points instead of the 4 out of 10 points. So that's a beautiful thing compared to the men that go harshly in one direction.
And I think that also links to recognition, and also really juggling your professional life and the way we're set up in our societies. We'll come on to it, our personal lives at certain stages in our career, and sometimes at very key stages in our career in terms of development. So I think that, there are some women, and I lead a number of professional women's networks, where the conversation is really around working smart personally, managing your time and working smarter, as opposed to trying to fit another 12 hours in the day to try and fit it all in. And I do think there's an education point around that, and that frankly is where kind of role modeling comes in, but we'll come on to that later.
Good. Yeah. Let's get back to very specifically the 4 themes. So we dealt a little bit with the career ambition. What can you say about equal opportunity? What do the results of the report say?
Yes, well, again, we were very specific in the question we asked here. And Walter, you may need to help me out here because I don't have the question in front of me. But the essence of it was we asked the same question to men and women. And that question was, do you believe that equally capable men and women have the same opportunities to progress their career, both in terms of their ambitions and their reward? So the perception from the men was that 82% of men who replied said, yes, I believe that women around me, so men and women, have the same opportunities, regardless of gender, if they are equally capable. Okay, so that's a high statistic. Yeah. When we asked the same question of women, only 58% of women felt that, all things being equal, men and women had the same career opportunities, particularly women. Yeah. So there is an education and awareness of piece around that in terms of, sometimes perception is reality. When we look at the world of work, quite a lot of leaders and managers, but particularly leaders, are male as things currently stand. And so if that is the perception, that there is not an issue there and that actually opportunity is available to everybody, regardless of gender, subject to ability only, then there is a difference of view between men and women and something that needs to be unearthed and tackled.
Yeah, definitely. First of all, the statistics you mentioned concern the Netherlands. But whatever the reason is for the perception of women, the advice is that employers should definitely step up the pace with delivering opportunity and showing opportunity for equal opportunity.
That's right, and that difference of opinion between men and women on their perception of equal opportunity, and the opportunities that then kind of link to women as of a right and on merit, that's shared globally. That's very much the case. What I shared with you, as you say, was the Netherlands statistic.
So there's a typical thing. Maybe it also comes down to a generational part, but Dutch men and women are amazed about what they see in Scandinavia, especially Sweden, with the opportunities with regards to maternity leave. Why is flexible working, why has it become such an important aspect in the world of work?
Okay, so I think there are two questions in there. One is around parental leave and what's the different experience between the male parent and the female parent. With the Scandinavians, I think everyone always references Scandinavia and says, "Wow, they really are streets ahead." And they have a use it or lose it policy, and it's been going for so long. It's very kind of embedded, and it's supported by all different mechanisms as well, which I'll come on to shortly. Actually, I'll actually touch that first. I think it's easier, and then I'll go on to flexible working after. So in terms of parental leave, that is a really, really big and topical issue at the moment. There are two issues that prevent men taking more of a proactive role as really a co-parenting in terms of actually being around the child as opposed to being in the office or doing other things. And there are two issues. The first one is the financial consideration. So by the time that this prospect kind of comes into play and becomes a reality, people may or may not be fairly well established in their careers. And if it is not cost effective for the man, the father, to take the time off work, and it is more cost effective for the woman to take the time off work, then that tends to drive certain decisions there. The other point to note, however, and this is something that we can address pretty much immediately as leaders of businesses, and we should also be aware of it as workers, if you like, is that if men choose to take their parental leave, unless it is absolutely mandated that it is use it or lose it, and that applies to everybody, if there is an element of choice in that and discretion, there is a perception on the part of men that they will be perceived to be less committed to their careers, which is not healthy, but it is a reality at the moment. And again, it's something that businesses should be addressing, as an action point.
But that's it's also it's not heavy survey results, but the tendency you see, especially amongst generations, so definitely not the baby boomers, that amongst men, and with regards to the work ethic and the culture around work, some men just seem to be performance tired, and it's not lacking ambition, but it's just the comparison between what society asks from me and also those questions from maternity leave. Why is there a difference for me? Because you see a growing need for me personally, to become a good father as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And again, we are talking about parenting here, but there are also considerations around who are the carers in society and kind of what's expected there as we work with a kind of, an aging generation, an aging population. So I think that this is where a culture of an organisation really does tend to kick in here, because the Gen Zs coming in, and indeed the millennials and then the Gen As that we're seeing, they will come in to the workplace thinking, well, I want to take advantage of everything that's available regardless of my gender. and that is male and female. So you get that parity and that kind of shared expectation. But what tends to happen in an organisation, and indeed in society more generally, is that that sense of parity starts to get eroded away when people start to be slotted into certain expected roles. And that's when it starts to link to perceived lack of commitment, actual, in a lot of cases, considerable loss of earnings. The other
Yvonne,
point, just yes.
Sorry, allow me to interrupt, because we've just been interrupted by a viewer, and it's always much fun to give them their feedback as well, to answer their questions. So we've got, I think it's about the maternity leave thing that triggered one person. It's a question from Benjamin, and he asked, what are the options for men when it comes to maternity leave?
Okay, well, this is very much dictated and governed by legislative frameworks and employment law. So that's going to be, I was a lawyer many years ago, but I wasn't an employment lawyer. So that is your rights, and whether they are statutory or extended, or indeed an organisation's policy has a wider range of rights, optional rights that you can take advantage of. That is very much tailored to the country and the employer. So I can't directly answer it, but even, again, our survey said that even where there is a statutory right to take leave, there was still this perception that if you took the whole leave that you were permitted to take, it was still seen as being perhaps, evidencing a lack of commitment. It is, at the moment, parental leave, maternity leave, is seen still very much as a female issue. And there's an expectation that, a woman goes through all her rights and her experience, and the father is slightly on the periphery. So, it's a nice to have as opposed to an essential.
It's good. I wanna thank Ben for his question.
Thank you, Ben.
He asked another question. So before we might as well stick to the one viewer instead of picking the next subject. Again, Benjamin asked, in your opinion, what do you think is the most underrated quality that women can bring to the boardroom? It's a completely different topic, but it's diversity.
Right. Exactly. And of course, thank you, Ben, for that question, because this was slightly outside of the remit of this, and that's a whole different question. But this is when we look at skills and competencies. And when we look at, the world of work, there are certain skills that are seen as more masculine, and some that are seen as more feminine. And again, an organisation needs to be aware, when we're looking at diversity difference, but actually you need a blend of those skills and those competencies to really, as I say, extract that dividend. So I personally think it is the ability to listen, the ability to collaborate, and frankly, as a leader, it's having emotional intelligence and being an inclusive leader. This concept of inclusive leader is absolutely essential when we are looking at diversity and inclusion in the workplace. And I do think that is what are naturally, again, stereotyping, but naturally are more female traits. One of the issues is that when we look at performance evaluation, you tend to be assessed against the more masculine, if you like, traits. And I think that the more feminine traits, and I am generalizing here, but they need to be dialed up and given additional weighting, or at least equal weighting, so you really do get that blend of skills and competencies. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, but it definitely does. I hope Ben wrote it all down. You can watch the replay of the show, but I definitely hope that a lot of women and also men wrote down this useful advice. Like we said, we've got different themes, and they vary much about what it is about. the final theme we had is diversity and inclusion. So what we've seen from the survey is that a relatively small amount of men and women state that, yeah, I know my company, the organization I work for, has got a diversity and inclusion program in place. But an even smaller percentage say that this is adherent well, so that it's actually not in practice. What we see is that inclusion actually is a much more urgent topic in the Netherlands. At least it is in the news way more than diversity is. There's not really that much wrong with diversity in Holland. What are the inclusion challenges we are facing?
Okay. So this is an example of the evolution. And a lot of organisations, you spoke about the policies, and in actual fact, quite a lot of organisations are doing some fabulous work, whether it is put into a policy, a formal policy, or whether actually it's just pockets of activity that are being done just intuitively because it's good practice and it's the right thing to do, smart thing to do. But a lot of organisations are flipping this on its head now, and as opposed to being a D and I policy, it's an I and D. So the inclusion is leading, and for me, the inclusion is all about the organisation, its culture, and it leads to retention, and that's why it's such an essential piece. Because again, in a lot of
Sorry to interrupt you, but could you give your personal explanation of inclusion? Because especially for Dutch viewers, it's not really a common theme or a common topic, actually, a name.
Well, again, I'm going to use a phrase that I hope would resonate with people. So when we look at diversity and inclusion, some people might say that diversity is being asked to the party, and inclusion is being asked to dance when you're there. So I'll just repeat that again, so I think it's quite neat. So diversity is being asked to the party, and inclusion is actually being asked to dance when you're there. So the inclusion element is actually whether you're an individual or an organisation or a leader, having some frameworks in place that actually capture and manage, because diversity without inclusion just means difference, and difference can be difficult. So the inclusion is really pulling it together and making sure that it works for you and that you actually see the benefits. Does that help?
Definitely, yeah. The metaphor and the explanation works very well.
Great. So yes, it's evolving, and so if we broadly say inclusion is around culture once you're in an organisation, and really harnessing that kind of dividend and then that type of value that the difference brings. The thing to be aware of, and this sometimes becomes a challenge, is that you don't have a one-size-fits-all, because you have all this difference in your organisation. And you could have loads of policies for absolutely everything, and you don't do anything massively well. So my advice when it comes to inclusion is to identify what is important to your organisation, and then and that's also as someone in the organisation to manage the messages upwards. To your managers and to your leaders. So see what the issue is, understand what it is, and then start taking some actions to address some of the challenges that there might be. And the key players when it comes to inclusion, particularly, are senior leadership. So the chief executive and the senior leadership team, you have to have the right tone from the top. If you don't have that, nothing will change. And it just becomes a kind of an HR policy and no one really cares too much about it. So you need to have tone from the top. And the other important stakeholder group is management, the squeezed middle, as I would call it, who have everything put upon them, all of the pressures of delivering targets and the organizations, etc., as well as managing this difference. And people don't leave organisations, they leave people.
Mm-hmm.
And so really focusing on the role of the manager when we look at inclusion and how that plays down on the shop floor is vital in terms of really trying to, move this forward.
Have you maybe got a personal best practice example besides Hayes, obviously?
Obviously. In what context? In terms of inclusion?
Inclusion, yeah. A good, maybe a well-known bigger company.
Top
of mind now, then we'll skip.
Yeah. No, I'll have a little think about it, because I mean there are lots of kind of anecdotes, particularly on inclusion. I'll give you an example of how this plays out. I think it's probably easier. I mean, there are lots of organisations who are doing some fabulous work around this. So, a lot of the oil and gas super majors, they've had a burning platform. I mean, they've also literally had a burning platform, but in terms of actually, the way they're organising their business, there's skills shortages in there. And they have been doing some fabulous work on this for a number of years, similar with financial services. So different sectors have different pinch points. Technology, again, different pinch points. And I think as far as I've slightly lost my train of thought, Walter. I'll have to come back to it. Sorry. Hold that thought and I'll come back to it. Hold that thought.
I'll ask it later. First of all, at the start of the webinar, we promised our viewers that we would give them information that they know what to do in their organization to help narrow the gender gap. What are the specific conclusions and recommendations you can give?
Okay, I will come back to my example in a minute. So in terms of recommendations and conclusions, this is not something that can be left to chance. So any steps that are put in place or any action that you get behind as an individual to try and affect change in your organization or to introduce change as a leader or as a manager is going to feel quite manipulated and engineered, and it needs to be. So be very open about that. This doesn't feel natural. So in order to create that change, I think there are certain things that you should expect and desire to see around you if you are in the workforce, or think about introducing if you're in a leadership role. The first one is you need to understand, where you are, and data will show you that. So don't just jump in and start making changes, because actually, unless you know why this is the smart thing to do for your organization, then you don't actually know what to focus on. So take some data points first of all. Where do you get the data points from? You get them from employee engagement surveys. You get them from exit interviews. You see who is progressing through the organisation when it comes to any type of selection or promotion process. So what is the data telling you would be my starting point. For some organisations, this is a burning platform. So it could be that there are skills shortages. So, for most leaders, this is very front of mind at the moment. And for others, actually their clients might be saying, I need you, I want you to do this, I expect you to do this. So particularly in professional services. So is there a burning platform? And if not, kind of work out what the business case is for making this change. That's a really important starting point. Then the second point is capturing what you do well. Now, there could be some policies in place. If there are, communicate them. That's my next point. But if you're very early in your journey, or you feel your organisation is early in its process, then actually there will always be pockets of great activity going on where, policy aside, people are interacting with each other in a very kind of inclusive way. So go and identify where those points are. Once you've got those and once you've captured them, then it really is a question of prioritizing what you want to go through, and what you want to deliver on. Do not try and do everything, because that is a lot of resource with probably very little impact. The reality is if you take a single area and do it really well, there is a halo effect. that will basically go on to all other areas of underrepresentation. So do one or two areas really well. I mentioned tone from the top, senior leadership. That should be communicated by senior leadership in ways that are accessible. You need to invest in the management layer, as I mentioned. That's absolutely essential. So some of the specifics around that, just in terms of policies and programs and actions, I would say unconscious bias training is a good starting point, just to bring people into a place where they can understand why these differences might start occurring. Then we have the role of communications, which is absolutely essential. The role of, or the position and importance of role modeling, sharing success stories, particularly when people are from groups that are underrepresented or are working in a slightly different way, i.e. potentially working flexibly. And by flexible, I mean flexible, I don't necessarily mean part-time. That's a whole different consideration. The roles of mentors, but importantly, sponsors as well. So who speaks up for you when you are not in the room? That sponsorship role is really important for all underrepresented groups. Setting targets. Now that's a bit contentious. I'm not talking quotas, which are very contentious and sometimes illegal, but setting targets, for example, diverse slates, every time there is a selection or promotion piece. That is, a useful tool to really drive through some of those changes. And importantly, it's having an element of inspection and accountability and, frankly, consequences from the senior leadership if those actions aren't being taken. One last point on that, I would say, if you can, in terms of the consequences, if that can be more of a carrot than a stick approach, so you are in the spotlight as, for example, an inclusive manager or someone who is really supporting diversity in the business, then you're in the spotlight for the right reasons and for positive reasons, and others want to join you. No one wants to be in the spotlight for the wrong reasons. So if you're early on your journey, use the carrot as opposed to the stick approach.
Makes sense. And basically, within what you just said in the last couple of minutes, is a structure to actually be able to change a culture.
Yes.
It is. So it is possible, because obviously culture is quite a big thing. We're not going to touch culture because we won't be able to change it, but you definitely can.
Oh, you can, and that takes me back to my example of inclusion, if I may give you that, just in terms of a worked example. So, if we talk about bias, when I say bias, I don't mean out and out discrimination, because that is clearly frowned upon and should be called out at every opportunity. Unconscious bias is a little bit more low-lying and kind of low-level, and it needs to be understood a little bit. So if we look at inclusion, a way that could play out would be the concept of a leader or an influencer or a manager in their role having an in-group and an out-group. Now, their in-group could basically be someone who clearly is of the same sex. It could be someone who went to the same college as them, someone who has the same interests as them. So anything same sports team, anything that gives you a connection with that individual. Now, when that person is in your in-group, the way in which you respond to them is very different and actually a lot more constructive than someone who is in your out-group, so someone who you don't have a connection with. So what happens, for example, in terms of a worked example, is when you are in an appraisal or when you are reviewing a key project as a team, as a leader or as the project manager, and again, just be aware that if you're the recipient of this, it's really important. If the manager is talking to someone in their in-group, they will give that person far more robust feedback. It will be probably more time will be spent on it, and they'll be given the opportunity to probably go back and do it again or reapply or whatever it might be. The reason they feel they can give that robust feedback that ultimately is a good thing is that they know how that person is likely to react. So that anxiety about, oh my gosh, is that person going to break down into tears or be very aggressive with me, or even, file a claim for, some type of inappropriate behaviour? Because they don't feel that will happen with the in-group, therefore that's the way they respond. With someone who is in the out-group, actually, they tend to get there's much more objective feedback, don't get into the weeds with them to really talk about the detail. And what typically would happen would be that project would be then given to someone else, and just, I'll leave the subject alone. And then what happens is, gradually, actually doesn't take that long, but over about from someone joining a business 18 months in, their competency level actually starts to fall behind quite considerably. Because they're just not getting the same coaching and the same opportunities and development. And so this is an incremental thing, and it's really important.
You should ask them to dance, right?
Well, that's right. Don't be afraid to ask them to dance. Absolutely. No. Teach them how to dance. Absolutely.
It doesn't matter if you win or lose, what you do on your dancing shoes. That's one phrase I remember from something else. Yvonne, we we're gonna get back to a different question but I'm actually gonna change it, because what I'm very curious about, and it's actually also a question that came in from Janne, and she's from Holland, is seeing her name, and she asked, which person or organization is your inspiration within diversity of the workplace?
Oh, gosh.
From with that, or maybe a situation that inspired you, but it should be a nice final quote.
It is actually, and actually it's very neat because it's Shell, actually. It's Shell. So you asked me at the beginning, and why am I so passionate about diversity? A number of years ago, when I was running our oil and gas business, I was asked by Shell to come in and work with them on a particular project. And I was firing all sorts of examples of what I felt they should be doing on this project to kind of get it up and running, to really drive actually more technical women, in fact, into their organisation. And everything I put to them, they were already doing. And I just thought, wow. And this was quite early on. I mean, the concepts of inclusion and diversity, they weren't as well socialised as they are now. And they had been at this for years. And as an organisation, they are hugely collaborative as well. So they are very happy to share their experiences. A lot of the stuff is on the website, actually, and they have all sorts of, research centres and thought leadership. So neatly, it's Shell. And, they did it because they had an issue around skills, but actually it's become embedded in that organisation, kind of top to bottom. So that is a fabulous example of an organisation, in my view.
That's good, and with some pride I can say the Royal Dutch Shell as well, because that's still there is the stock market name, I think.
That's right.
Yvonne, we're going to wrap it up. I'm saying thank you for a very inspiring talk. Great anecdotes, great examples, and most importantly, also the good recommendations of what organizations can do to narrow the gender gap or the inclusion gap. It doesn't matter what topic you get. We're going to wrap it up. I'm going to say thank you from Amsterdam. Enjoy your day in London, and please allow me to invite you another time. I'm not going to wait till next year when we come up with the next annual report, but let's do an intermediate interview as well.
I would be delighted, and goodbye from London. That sounds very Eurovision Song Contest. Goodbye from London.
Maybe you can give your points. Thank you, Yvonne.
Nil point.
Thank you so much. Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.